Hello, everyone. I wish you a truly peaceful day. Today's episode opens in an unusual silence, as James still lies there in the small clinic, unconscious, and the entire village seems to be holding its breath, waiting for a fragile sign that could change everything. Diep has stayed awake through the long night, not to cry or scream in fear, but to sit quietly beside him, silently waiting, counting each breath, each moment slipping by in the stillness. Because sometimes, just one night can become the boundary between keeping someone here and learning how to accept letting them go. Let's begin. Diep didn't truly sleep that night. She only slumped forward beside the small table against the wall, arms folded, her forehead resting lightly on them. Each time her eyelids barely closed, a vague sense of unease would pull her awake again, as if falling into deeper sleep, even for a moment, might make her miss something terribly important. The clinic was so quiet that every sound felt unnaturally sharp. The small ceiling fan spun steadily, giving off a dry, buzzing hum. Out in the hallway, the slow footsteps of the night shift nurse could be heard from time to time, then fade back into silence. Each time she heard that sound, Diep lifted her head instinctively, her heart tightening as she waited for something, though she wasn't even sure whether she hoped for good news or bad. James lay motionless on the bed. His head was wrapped in thick bandages, his face pale under the cold white lights. Diep pulled her chair a little closer, not to touch him, but to see him more clearly. She watched his chest rise and fall ever so faintly, each weak but steady breath like a thin thread keeping him tethered to the present. There were moments when the pause between breaths made Diep go completely still, until his chest lifted again, and only then did she dare to breathe out. Diep didn't speak out loud, but inside her heart she kept whispering broken prayers. Not grand pleas, just simple ones. Please let him wake up. Please let this night pass safely. Please give me the strength to sit here. Each time, she bowed her head a little lower, as if afraid her own thoughts might shatter the fragile quiet. A nurse stepped in to check on him. Diep immediately stood up and moved aside, giving her space. She didn't ask questions, didn't press, didn't cling to the need for a clear explanation. She only watched the nurse's face, trying to read the smallest sign, a furrowed brow, a moment of hesitation, or even the slightest change in her gaze. "He's still stable," the nurse said evenly, as if she had repeated those words many times, "but he hasn't woken up yet." Diep nodded. She murmured a soft thank you and sat back down. The answer didn't bring relief, but it didn't deepen her panic either. It simply placed another layer of weighting on her shoulders, a long, heavy layer. She stood again and adjusted the blanket when she noticed it had shifted slightly. A very small gesture, but enough to make her feel she was still doing something for him, still playing the role of someone trying to hold him in this life. As the night slowly wore on, and the light outside the window faded toward dawn, Diep's head felt heavy with exhaustion. But she didn't allow herself to collapse again. She stepped outside to wash her face with cold water, stared at her reflection in the mirror for a few seconds, reminding herself to stay alert, then returned to his bedside. James was still there, unconscious, silent, but breathing. And so Diep sat down once more, continuing to wait, continuing to count each breath, in silence, in worry, and in prayers that never found a voice. Morning arrived very slowly. When the sunlight finally reached the steps in front of the clinic, Mrs. Huyen was already there. Earlier she had taken Nhi home, made her breakfast, and brought her to school just like any other day. Everything had been done neatly, without chaos, as if she were trying to preserve a familiar rhythm for the child, so that she herself could leave without carrying even more worry. James lay there, silent. White bandages wrapped around his head, his face pale, his lips dry. Mrs. Huyen stood still for a few seconds, as though her eyes needed time to accept what they were seeing. Then she lifted her hand and lightly touched the edge of the blanket. her fingers trembling as she struggled to hold herself together. Mrs. Huyen turned to Diep. Her gaze paused, then softened quickly. She spoke a short sentence, clear enough to be heard, yet gentle enough not to disturb anyone. "Thank you. You've been through so much." It wasn't politeness. It wasn't courtesy. It was the voice of a mother who knew she had not been alone during the longest night of her life. She loved James. There was no need to say that. But she also loved Diep. She loved the way the young woman had sat through the night without falling apart. She loved how Diep had carried the calm so that she herself could afford to be weak for a moment. She loved, too, Diep's quiet restraint, never turning pain into noise. Mrs. Huyen let out a soft breath. For the first time since entering the clinic, she allowed herself to sit down. Not because everything was fine, but because she knew that here, there was someone standing with her, holding James in this life. In that small room, amid the smell of antiseptic and the white lights, two women stood on either side of an unconscious man. One was his mother, one was the one who stayed, and between them, no further promises were needed, only a quiet gratitude, enough to wait together. James still hadn't fully woken up, but something was different from the night before. His breathing was steadier, deeper, no longer broken by pauses that forced others to hold their breath with him. Beneath the thin blanket, his hand curled slightly, then relaxed again, very faintly, like an unconscious reflex. His eyelids fluttered once, then stilled, movements so small that, without attention, one might think they were imagined. Diep watched closely. She didn't rush. She didn't call his name. She simply observed, like watching the surface of water to sense a shift in the wind. Mrs. Huyen noticed as well. She leaned forward just a little, the experienced eyes of a mother missing nothing, yet she remained seated, reminding herself not to act too quickly. A nurse stepped in, checked the IV, shone a light into James's eyes for a few seconds, then turned it off. Her voice was brief, just enough to hear. "He's slowly waking up. Don't call to him. Don't ask too much." No one asked anything more. No one tried to stretch that moment with words. Diep nodded slightly and stepped back half a pace to make room. Mrs. Huyen exhaled, as if setting down a burden she had carried all night. The room returned to quiet. Only steady breathing remained, and the morning light fading softly beyond the window. Diep stood there, her hands hanging loosely, with a fragile yet unmistakable feeling inside. James was not back yet, but he had begun to find his way back, and right now, the most important thing was not to wake him, but to give him enough peace to return in his own time. James opened his eyes very slowly, so slowly it was hard to tell whether it was an unconscious reflex or a deliberate effort. His eyelids parted just a narrow slit, his gaze cloudy and disoriented, like someone emerging from a sleep too deep to immediately understand where he was. The white light of the clinic made him squint, and then his eyes began to drift, failing to settle on anything, sliding across the ceiling, across the empty space ahead, as if searching for something familiar amid the remaining chaos in his mind. And then, his gaze stopped, not on Diep, not on the nurse, but on Mrs. Huyen. She was sitting very close, close enough that her face became the clearest image within James's still blurred vision. No one spoke. No one moved. That moment passed in absolute silence, as if the entire room were waiting for the smallest signal. Mrs. Huyen leaned toward her son, her voice trembling yet kept low, soft, almost meant for James alone to hear. "James, it's Mom." Just one sentence, nothing more. James blinked, once, then again, slow, heavy, but unmistakably real. His gaze, once unfocused, fixed itself on that face. The face that had been with him since childhood, through fevered nights, through illnesses that stole sleep. No questions were needed, no explanations. This was enough. Amid all the confusion of body and mind, Amid the exhaustion he had yet to name, a mother remained the instinctive anchor, the first place memory returned to, the one thing that had never disappeared. Mrs. Huyen did not cry. She simply tightened her grip on her son's hand just a little, as if to confirm that this moment was real. And behind her, Diep stood still, quietly witnessing it all, understanding that in this very instant, James had come back from the deepest place within his own consciousness. After James's gaze settled on Mrs. Huyen, after his eyelids fluttered softly as if confirming a familiar anchor, his eyes slowly drifted away. Not hurried, not decisive. They moved across the empty space of the room, brushed past the edge of the bed, and then stopped somewhere else. On Diep. That moment lasted longer than usual. It wasn't just a fleeting glance. It was a look that lingered, as if James were trying to fit a fragment of memory back into its proper place. His eyes did not brighten, nor did they soften. There was no clear joy in them, no familiar warmth of someone waking up to see the person they love. There was only confusion, and a very real effort to connect. James looked at Diep for a beat longer, long enough for her to realize that he was trying to understand. Who is this person? Why is she here? Why does this sense of safety come from this direction? His brow furrowed slightly, as if his mind were working too hard. His lips moved faintly, but no words came. The thought was there, but his body hadn't caught up yet. After his gaze had rested on Mrs. Huyen, after that faint blink, an instinctive recognition of his mother amid the chaos of consciousness, his eyes shifted again, slowly, indistinctly, without resolve, and came to rest on Diep. This time, they stayed there longer. It wasn't the warm look of someone waking to the sight of their loved one, nor was it the vacant stare of someone who remembered nothing. It was a gaze mixed with confusion, exhaustion, and a genuine attempt to connect, as if James were pulling at a fragile thread in his mind, trying to understand why this woman was standing here, and why the feeling of safety seemed to come from her. Diep understood immediately. She stepped closer to the bed, each step slow, unhurried, not letting emotion override the clarity this moment required. She stopped where James could see her clearly, leaned down just enough so their eyes were on the same level, and only when she was certain he was looking at her did she speak. Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't catch. It was low and gentle, like an anchor. "You're safe now." She paused for a very brief moment, then continued slowly. "Your mom is here. I'm here too." James's eyelids fluttered faintly. His gaze remained on Diep for a few more seconds, longer than on anyone else in the room. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but his throat only tightened slightly, no sound forming. His mind was clearly still lagging behind his body, but his eyes showed one thing with certainty. He knew he wasn't alone. James moved his lips again, very slowly, with great effort, as if gathering enough breath alone were a struggle. His throat tightened, and the sound that came out wasn't a full word, not a sentence, just a hoarse, broken syllable that nearly dissolved into the quiet air of the clinic. Thank. No one asked who he was speaking to. No one needed him to say more. Because in that moment, that single word was enough to hold everything. Thanks to the mother who hadn't left his side, thanks to Diep standing there with him, and thanks for the simple fact that he was still here, having crossed back from the thinnest line between losing and remaining. After that hoarse, broken word, James gradually slipped back into sleep, this time deeper, steadier, as if his body finally allowed itself to release some of the vigilance after a long stretch of tension. His breathing stabilized. His face no longer tightened with pain or panic, leaving only the pure exhaustion of someone who had just passed through a razor-thin boundary between life and loss. The doctor stepped out, his voice low and measured, saying briefly that James had made it through the most dangerous stage. But the road to recovery ahead would not be short, and no one should rush to expect too much too soon. Everything would take time, to let the body remember, to let the mind reorganize, to to let the man return fully to who he was. Diep nodded, listening carefully, then glanced at Mrs. Hoyen. She said nothing, only gently squeezed Diep's hand in quiet understanding. By late afternoon, Diep had to leave the clinic to pick up Ly and take care of the evening responsibilities that couldn't be postponed, even though every step away felt heavier than when she had arrived. Before turning to go, Diep stopped by the bed one more time. Just then, James opened his eyes. Not for long, not clearly. He looked at Diep, his gaze still tired and hazy. He didn't speak, but he didn't turn away either. He simply held on, as if gripping a thin thread tying him to this world. Diep gave a small nod, like a promise without words, and then she left. James had woken up, but to fully come back, he still had a very long road ahead.